Yeah, hey everyone. Thanks for joining in. My name is Carl. I'm going to be your solutions expert today. Joining us later in the discussion is going to be Terrence Starling from the SOC. He's one of our senior SOC engineers. I'm excited to bring him on. I've been working with Terrence for a long time now. I handpicked him to come on here and talk about some of the information that goes along with just talking about, a high-level SOC expert and all the information that goes into that. So let's get started. This is my very first webinar, and I got to say, this is awesome. And I really am excited about this topic. I think it's a very important topic that everyone needs to stay aligned on in the cybersecurity space. And with that being said, I'm just going to go over the agenda really quick just to make sure that what we're going to be discussing is in line with what everyone's expectations are. So let's take a look here. So first off, of course, the first slide we're going to be discussing here is those pain points in traditional MDRs. Secondly, we're going to start bringing on the SOC spotlight here with Terrence, and as well as follow that up with a quick demo. Next, we're going to be looking at the metrics around that success. So really wrapping in holistically, what Terrence and I discussed about and what I discussed about, again, where those MDRs are falling short. And lastly, we're going to be talking more on the proactive risk management, which discusses more beyond that MDR capability and really building out holistically what it looks like in a perfect world, what an MDR should be giving you, should be telling you. Okay. And of course, in the very last piece there, we're going to have a good 10, 12 minutes or so on a Q&A. So if you have any questions for me, make sure you write them down as we go through the slides. And be sure to ask me at the end. I'm really here for those challenging questions. I'm excited in this MDR space. I want everyone to understand that there's no wrong question to ask here. Just ask away at the end. So really quick, before we kick this off, I do have one quick poll question that I want to throw at you guys. So next, what's your biggest frustration with your MDR provider today? Is it alert fatigue, the UI complexity, maybe around the automation? I hear this a lot, automation. Maybe it's around the time to respond because it's just too slow. It's not getting to you fast enough. And as of course, what everyone sees on the test is all the above. If it's all of these, then, make sure you tell us, be very specific. We take a look at this. We want to make sure we understand where those pain points are coming from so that we can see, what everyone's kind of feeling in terms of that. We'll take a look at those here in a little bit. So moving forward, we have the next slide, which is, of course, the most important slide, in my opinion, here is to kick things off, is talking about exactly where everything is falling and sliding downhill very, very quickly. As we know, the cybersecurity landscape, it changes very fast. Year over year, even month over month, we see a lot of things popping up in the news, a lot of new 0 days. 0 days are drastically becoming more and more important to keep eyes on. And so we need to make sure we're constantly changing the theme around what it means to be a proactive MDR, to not fall short, to keep into that non-traditional sense of an MDR, and keep an open mind on how we're expanding and evolutioning what an MDR should look like. So first point here, first value I want to look at is priority-based tuning on selective alert investigation. What do I mean by selective alert investigation? We're talking about, alerts in general, keyword here. So lows, mediums, and highs. You've got that critical state as well there, but of course that kind of tailors into the highs. So the one I hear the most about is those lows and mediums, where a lot of MDRs are just not looking at those, and customer base as well. Like there's not enough time to look at there's not enough time to look at all of those lows, right? They only want to make sure they look at the highs. From the MDR perspective, you need to look at all of them. No alert should go unnoticed or unchecked. Recommended response guidance only. This is extremely important because from the MDR perspective, you're relying on us to be the expert. If we're not giving you the proper guidance and response, then we're failing you. And that's where we need to come up and help you get ahead by telling you exactly what you need to do, because that reduces that dwell time, right? It reduces that risk because we're telling exactly what you need to do instead of possibly, opening up that run book and going, what should we do here? We've got ransomware, it's moving laterally. No, we can provide that. Well, not we, I'm saying MDR in general can and should provide that response for you. Playbooks for response engagement not aligned to organizational needs. Now, I hear this a lot because when we think about an MDR needs to fit the bill across the board, right? It doesn't matter if it's your banking, oil, gas, industry, industrial, I should say. Like MDRs need to be able to fit all of those and make sure that they're aligned to frontline workers, to executive management. It does not matter where an MDR should plug and play. It needs to make sure that the MDR stays partnered and aligned to what your foundation needs. Well, and by the way, I know I'm going over these at a very high level. We're going to dive into this a little bit further as we get through here. And if there's something in here that you have a question about, make sure you ask that towards the end because I'm happy to dive into this a little bit further. Slow to respond or can't respond on the go. So we all work that 9 to 5. What about the other, hours that you're not working? What about the weekend? Now, not necessarily saying that you should be working those hours, but you should be able to respond fast enough in order to make sure that if something does happen, A, MDR can get a hold of you, and B, either MDR can take action fast for you, or we can provide that response and you can come back to us with a response quicker. Now, that's a key aspect there in terms of making sure that as MDRs, go towards that faster evolution stepping stone. We're gonna talk a little bit about that here in a little bit. No contractual service level agreement. I hear this a lot. Why doesn't a new MDR in this space have a contract that states how long and how short a time should be in order to address every alert? Now, that is something that if you're not getting those SLAs, that's super important. All lows, all mediums, all highs need to have a time behind it so you understand exactly when an alert comes in, what your expectation is on when you're going to get that resolved. Lack of ROI. Now, when you sign up with an MDR, how do you know that you're getting value to your service? How do you know you're getting what you pay for? Extremely important here. We're going to touch base on that as well a little bit, but extremely important that you know exactly what you're signing up for. Email alert fatigue. I feel like that is probably one of the hottest topics in this slide right here. We hear this across the board. An alert pops off and your email is pretty much getting inundated with multiple alerts. So we're going to talk about that false positive. We're going to talk about those alert investigations. Should it be 5 pages long? No. It should be very, very high level, but with immediate action and immediate response on what you need to do. That's going to be covered in the demo, so make sure you stay tuned for that. Lack of visibility into coverage. Only as good as the signals it receives. Why is this important? You need to make sure you have coverage across the entire platform. And you need to have an MDR that is allowing the space to tell you when you don't have coverage in those specific areas. Figuratively speaking, if you don't have an MDR that's doing that, well, how do we know that we're alerting and responding to everything in your environment? How do we know that there's not a gap in visibility? An MDR needs to provide that response to you and make sure they align with you to make sure that there's not that gap. There's not that visibility going forward. So, leaving you to think, are there traditional MDRs just leaving you vulnerable? As we go through the exposure awareness on this, MDRs have always been reactive, of course, right? Manage, detect, and respond. So that's the traditional sense. And as we move forward, we have to shift left and be more proactive in this space in order to cover all aspects, build that perimeter. Make sure you verify the configuration and foundation that you're building all of this MDR on. So I'm going to let this slide build out a little bit because I want to talk about this a little bit further. So on the proactive sense, we have the cybersecurity validation slide on the left, right? We cannot just think that plugging in an MDR with the EDR products is just going to solve everything. It's not that simple. There needs to be validation, verification, follow-up, troubleshooting, making sure that all of these aspects are taken care of, right? And you should be getting that during the onboarding and then a verification post onboarding as well after a certain amount of time, as well as making sure that there is a verification on the attack surface as well. So bringing in vulnerabilities, number one. And how do you make sure you prioritize those vulnerabilities? Because there's always thousands and thousands. If you're in the hundreds, well, you're on the next level, but there's always thousands of vulnerabilities going on. There's always going to be gaps going on. How do you prioritize them? How do you bring awareness to them? That is bringing proactive into the MDR space. Essentially what the last slide is entailing here, right? You need to bring in that SIM, need to bring in those user identity logs, need to prioritize those logs, optimize those logs, make sure that the tables are getting filled out and detections are firing off of them. So all that said, stepping into the limelight here, we need to discuss a little bit more about how does a SOC do that with the MDR solution. But before we do that, I just want to give a brief overview of what I just spoke about looks like in an overview, basically in a diagram, right? So on the left side, if we look at a customer's environment, we're looking at all of the things there, right? So assets and vulnerability, what I just spoke about, right? Those gaps and looking at the vulnerabilities that are currently, active in your environment. And then stepping down, of course, your EDR, your hybrid XDR, your SIM, all of the cloud infrastructure coming in, making sure we identify anything on the network, right? Firewalls, user identity, right? So that's going into that user log identification space. And of course, one of the hottest topics right now in the last 2 years has been, phishing. So bringing in the email campaigns as well. Lastly, we didn't really touch on this yet, and we will, but not to leave it devoid of this context here, is incident response. We're going to touch in that a little bit, but I'm just going to leave that there because that is basically, putting the lid on everything to make sure that we have response, action, but also recovery. So moving to the right on this, as you can see, everything I just basically talked about is there in the center piece, which is the controlled gaps, vulnerability prioritization, and of course the deep business context around the gaps associated with that and the asset inventory. Now, moving down, you can see the value, right? The 99% of alerts, removing that field and making sure that you're only looking at the 1% of alerts. Because if you're looking at thousands of lows and mediums, and hopefully not thousands of highs, but hundreds of highs, you're never going to have the time of day to look at all of those alerts as they're coming in. It's just going to compounding effect over time. So you need to make sure that you're looking at the 99%, carving that out, getting to the 1%, but then the goal, getting to the 0.01%. So realistically, 20,000 seat, customer really should only be looking at like those 10, 20 alerts a month. If that sounds like a dream, I'm telling you it's real because you can get there. And I work with customers that are at that right now. So the bottom portion there, learning from the endpoints, learning from all of those events, that builds into the 99%. We're going to talk a little bit about that here in just a minute because I'm going to bring Terrence on and we're going to discuss a little bit about those value points. So moving forward, I'm going to go ahead and kill my screen sharing and we're going to bring Terrence up. Terrence, if you can come up to the stage, I want to introduce Terrence. He's one of our senior SOC engineers. Go ahead and give yourself a brief introduction.
Hey, it's nice to be here. This is also my first webinar, so I apologize that my camera quality isn't as nice as Carl's today. But yeah, my name is Terrence Starling. I've been here at Critical Start for headed towards 4 years now, and I started in the SOC as a level 1 analyst. So if an alert came in for your environment, I was one of the first people that would have seen it, began the triage on it, and if necessary, escalated that back to your org or provided you additional details about it, including potentially a 12 a.m. phone call if necessary to make sure you were aware of that. From the L1 level, I moved up to the SOC engineer level. So I was also the one building those filters and playbooks at that point to try to assist a little bit with all those alerts you may have heard Carl mentioning earlier, right? Those thousands of email notifications, right? And finally, I made it to that SSE or senior SOC engineer position where I was a member of the training team. So both new internal analysts coming in, just like I was as an L1, my responsibility was to train them, get them up to speed, get them prepared to handle the alerts. And of course, external training like I'm doing right now, but never in a webinar. So this is really cool to be a part of. You'll see how excited I get throughout this. I apologize in advance. I really enjoy training. So it's just, yeah, it's nice to be here.
Yeah. Awesome, Terrence. Thank you. So Terrence, I'm going to this is going to go, and just for everyone watching right now, we're going to steer this into more of a, podcast scenario here because I want you guys to basically feel like you're in my seat. And I want, there to be the direct one-to-one to what I just spoke about here. So Terrence, quick question, a few questions I have for you. First one, how do we look at every alert, low, medium, high? How do we do that?
Yeah, so we are indeed observing every security event that's generated within our platform. I know it sounds crazy. I promise we're doing it, right? It does depend on the security tool in question, right? Whatever tool you've chosen for protecting your environment or lowering your attack surface, right? We're monitoring things like static-based detection. So think about old school AV, right? Signature-based detections is a good way to look at that. We're looking at behavioral threats. So suspicious or malicious activity that may be occurring. Think about command lines, right? Lateral movement, the sticky keys type behavior, right? We're also looking at, and very tool dependent, right? If you have intra ID or Active Directory type monitoring or logging in your environment, we're also looking at identity-based protections to make sure your users' behavior is nominal, expected, and authorized.
So then how do we get to the point of like reducing the false positives, like I was saying on the diagram?
Yeah, that's a really great question that I love talking about because it was a team I used to be on. In one word, automation. In our words, orchestration and tuning, right? So we're looking at playbooks, we're looking at filters. These are both tools we utilize to make the workflow more efficient, but also just to reduce all that noise from alerts, right? We're trying to reduce alert fatigue as much as possible. I'll go back to it one more time. You spoke about those thousands of emails you could receive in a single day, right? That's just the email. We're not talking about the actual L1s, right? Internally at your organization or IT professionals even, right, in your organization that are logging into these consoles and tenants and trying to go through every single, not just alert, but some tools separate them into incidents. And incidents can have a plethora of different events that have been logged within them. That's a lot of noise, right? So we're building these playbooks, we're building these filters, we're also doing console tuning, all just to minimize as much of that alert fatigue as possible. Things, for instance, like Chrome auto updating, right? That's something the tool is going to alert on because it looks like suspicious behavioral activity, when in reality, it's completely nominal, completely expected. So that's the type of behavior we're constantly trying to tune out. Furthermore, I know what you're thinking, like, hey, if you're filtering at that large of a number, right? You said something like going from 100% down to potentially somewhere around 1% of those events that are actually viable alerts that need to be actioned, right? That's even more important, that we have the two-person integrity within our SOC. What I mean by two-person integrity is no filter is ever built, approved, and put into place without at least two people within the SOC reviewing it. And it's never just going to be an L1. It's going to be a SOC engineer and then someone higher on the chart than a SOC engineer, right? So you're taking away as much room for mistakes as possible. And we're also reviewing that stuff consistently. We have a whole team of guys who aren't in the queue working these alerts. Their only job is doing orchestration for our clients within our platform.
That's a great response. So then, speaking more about the filters, then what does the filter and playbooks do? Like, what's the value of those?
Yeah. You heard me say alert fatigue, but that's not where it ends. We're kind of just talking about resolving alerts, right? When we talk about alert fatigue, but in reality, there's way more to it than that. For instance, playbooks. One of my favorite topics to talk about with my new hires are playbooks. Playbooks are really cool because they can not only route detections, they can also leave us event hints that provide guidance to our analysts. And I'll get back to the routing of alerts in a second here, but they leave event hints. Event hints are essentially guidance given to our analysts when they begin working alerts. Now, you might ask, what do they need all that guidance for, right? Can that not be something that's just assumed as they work the alert? But the truth is, when you're talking about this large plethora of alerts we're constantly staring at, they're not all going to be just emails related to phishing. They're not all just going to be static binary type detections, right? You're going to have a lot of in between, like unauthorized AWS activity. And then right after that, you might get something related to a bloodhound type hack tool, right? So that bouncing from one thing to the next, we want to efficientize that process because, as you mentioned, we have a contractual SLA and we're not going to break that, right? We're going to make sure all these alerts get resolved within that given SLA time period. To do that, we create efficiencies where we can. Playbooks are one of the best ways to do that because they provide analysts with that guidance. Now, I also spoke about routing things. Sometimes you have an org who has very specific custom-built detections, right? Those may not be detections that are going to go automatically to our analysts. But in the meantime, while that detection is being reviewed internally, we can still make sure those get routed to your org so that day or night, 24/7, you're getting access to those same things. And that's just playbooks, right? We also still have filters, investigation procedures, a whole lot of orchestration that we can work within core.
Yeah, that's a lot. There's a lot that goes into playbooks and filters, right? That's two different verticals right there, and there's a lot of values that go into them. So then, I guess really to build on that, like when more information comes through, how do you build on the filter, right? Make it better, improve on it. How does that work?
Yeah, it's super easy and seamless to make changes to filters. Again, this was one of those areas I love doing because it becomes almost like a logical game to us, right? Because we're looking for the safest, most logical method to filter these things, right? If you have, for instance, let's take a new user being added to a local group on a host, right? Think about net user type detections, right? It's super easy to just filter out anything containing net.exe using Boolean logic, right? If and ifs contains, right? But if we do it that way, we've just lost visibility into anyone being added, regardless of who did it, regardless of the group, right? Regardless of whether it's just a password change, whatever. We've just gotten rid of multiple different things. Sure, that's going to help with alert fatigue, but now we're losing visibility into a potential security concern in the environment, right? So that's a good area where we have these filters. We can build out mandatories and optionals that allow us to say, not only does it contain net.exe, but this specific user is the causality user of this action containing this specific local group, right, on this specific host. And that can all be things that our clients provide us, right? We can build a data feed that we can add to filters. So if you have a list of, let's say, 20 to 30 authorized users, that it's never questionable. It's always nominal behavior for them to create a new user on a host. All we have to do is go in, add that user to that feed, hit the save button, have somebody review it, and now you shouldn't have to worry about alerting until you're ready to worry about alerting for those specific users with that specific activity, and we're not capturing anything else, just the specific activity we wanted to. It's that simple to modify filters, playbooks, or feeds within core.
That's great. So then building even more into that, I'm going to shift a little bit because a lot of this is great value add. But one of the things I spoke about is the amount of information that comes in and the time spent trying to read through the investigation, right? So an alert populates from a tool, right? The tool states there's a lot going on in here. Tool may not be giving you all the information you need. How does the SOC build that into maybe a story? Is there a story to tell basically on the escalation? How do you do that? What are some steps in best practice values that the SOC utilizes to tell the customer, to tell the person on the other side, this is what was observed. This is some actions and responses that you should take.
Yeah, absolutely. Great question. So every escalation is going to come in kind of a standardized format, right? Starting with the priority that we've kind of assigned to that alert, going into what we call the what was observed section, followed by the what is the risk, followed by the what is recommended. Every single escalation we write up with that standardized format. And while the format is standardized, the content in each of those sections will be uniform to the specific activity that we're investigating in that instance, right? If you have requested a playbook in the past and you have an ROE that says this specific behavior, when observed, should always be a high priority escalation and have a courtesy call attached to it, then you're going to get a high priority for that behavior and you're going to get a courtesy call, right? I do want to talk a little bit about kind of those escalation structures just a tad bit more. When you go into the what was observed, we're talking about everything we observed in that specific log of information, right? That security event. The observed section will contain things like the user, the host, if relevant, right? The IP, hash values, if necessary, attached with an OSINT link to a provider like VirusTotal or maybe Alien Vault, so that you don't have to go do all that research to figure out what that is. We're putting all of that in the observations, and we're putting it in a very concise manner, because who's going to read 4 paragraphs when they just received a high priority, right?
Yeah,
That's wasted time. Then we go into the risk. We go into the risk section. I get really excited when I talk about SOC actions. It's been my life for 4 years. I can't help it. We go into the risk section, which feeds directly from the observations, right? These are risks specific, not to just the reason the console has classified this as the threat it is, right? But what we determined to be the risk when we were investigating that incident. So those are going to change. Even if you see 2 alerts for user reported email as phish, you're going to get 2 different risks for those, because the risk may be different. You know, one might be a URL that takes you to a fake Microsoft login page, whereas the other might take you to a website that redirects you 5 times and then tries to download something. Those are 2 different risk sections. So the escalation will include, all of that. And then it'll conclude with a recommended section that gives you actionable items that you can do. It's not just going to tell you, oh, we recommend blocking that website. It seems bad. It's going to say, we recommend blocking this URL, or we've already taken action to block this URL. We recommend revoking the sessions, the active sessions for this user, and resetting their creds. Very specific actionable items. And you can always respond right back to us. And we can assist with any of that as long as we have the permissions to do so.
Excellent. With that being said, it sounds like we need to step into the demo a little bit, because what we're talking about here kind of showcases exactly what you're talking about, right? So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen really quick. Let this load up. Give it about 2 seconds as Goldcast loads this. What I have loaded here is... and this isn't, just so everyone on the call, I'm not showcasing any kind of sensitive data here. This is just a demo environment here we have on our platform. And what I've taken here is an alert. And in this case, this is somebody clicking on a URL that was in an attachment of an email, right? So it's embedded within an email. They click it, and on the click, right, something occurred, right? So I wanted to step through with you, Terrence, like how do we move through this? How do we look at all of this information on the page? Where do we start?
Yeah, so first disclaimer, I'm staring at the alert on this screen because Carl sent it to me. So if you see me pivoting back and forth, just know that's what I'm doing. So when I'm training our new analysts and I'm saying, hey, what is the best place to start when you're looking at an alert? I always tell them to start with 2 things. Define the why, and then define the what. Why is this firing? It's obviously a security event, because that's what our job is. It's to investigate and triage initially into these security events. What type of security event is it, though? In this instance, let's walk through the why. So the why did this fire is because someone potentially clicked a URL that may have been malicious, right? I can assume based on that, it's probably related to some type of email potential attack, right? The what here will be the entities. So the URL, right? The sender, the IP associated with said email. So those are all the things I want to start my investigation kind of honing in on. I'm going to do OSINT on that URL, OSINT on that IP, probably even OSINT on that email to see if we've seen it anywhere in the environment prior to this. We're going to be running KQL queries if it's a Microsoft related tool, right? To see if we've seen anything else, whether it's from that subject, that user, that IP, etc. We're also going to look, because we have the ability to run those KQL queries, we're also going to be looking to make sure this click was a real click, excuse me. Right? Because we have things like click through, click allowed. Those all mean different things, right? If click allowed, then it means they went straight to that URL from their email, right? If it's a click through, it means they were probably prompted by Defender that this could be a malicious or suspicious website that they're navigating to, and they still click through to it, right? That can change the level of priority. If those are at 0 in the log, might not really be a concern in the immediate, to the point where we have to send that up as a high and call you at 3 a.m. To tell you, hey, we may have seen a click, right? These are all things we're taking into account to make sure that we're providing you guys value and also ensuring you're not getting that alert fatigue.
So on the right side here, I noticed that there's comments, escalations going on. I see that this is a high priority. This came from one of our analysts here. And you can quickly see that this turns into a very small summary of what you were just talking about, what was observed, the risk and recommendation here. And similarly, how you were talking about, checking to make sure if, where this came from, it was marked, and that they actually clicked on the URL, right? So maybe we can talk a little bit about what the recommendation is here, because I feel like that is what we talked about before. What the key value is of where the MDRs fall short of telling them exactly what they need to do in this instance, in this demo.
Yeah, absolutely. And so the recommendation is probably the most, with the exception to the observed, right? Because behavior is changing. But even if the behavior is identical and we're basically telling you the same exact observations in 2 or 3 different alerts, right, over a given time period, the recommendation is going to change because it's always actionable items for you to perform. If we've said, hey, we've sent this to you twice in the past 2 weeks, it's the same URL, same user, etc. Now we're talking about looking maybe a couple layers deeper. Why does this email keep arriving in this user's inbox? You see what I mean? Those recommendations will continue to change. One thing you don't see in this is right above the what we recommend. We will also have an action taken. We're not just going to pass everything on the buck onto to our clients and tell them to do all this work. If we have the permissions and your permission, remember I was speaking about the ROEs earlier. If you've given us a list of critical assets or servers or users that we shouldn't take action on, then of course we'll send it to you with those actionable steps, right? In the context of, hey, these fit the bill of the ROE. We shouldn't take action. If they're not on that list and you've told us we have permission to take those actions, then we're going to be revoking sessions, right? We're going to be initiating that credential reset. We will initiate a host isolation. We will add block indicators for that domain or URL or IP address, right? And these are all actionable steps that'll be transparent and provided to you in the escalation.
What is the event hint here in this instance?
Yes, I'm so happy you pointed that out. So here the event hint is giving a little bit of feedback or guidance to our analysts about where they should go and where they should start. Remember what I said earlier about event hints value being a little bit deeper and multifaceted, right? One was it being able to route things. One was it being able to provide guidance to our analysts to make the process just a tad bit more efficient, right? This is a good example of that. If an analyst is new or even experienced, but they're coming from another alert, this kind of calibrates their workflow so that they know, hey, I just finished a static detection. Now I'm on to an identity or email-based detection. These are the things, these are the key values that I should be looking for that are going to provide me with more information and help me investigate and triage this in the most efficient manner possible so that I can quickly get it to the client if it does turn out, to be a higher priority or higher severity threat in question. So event hints, super beneficial, and they're specific to the detection.
And we can customize that, right? So that if this specific customer basically said, we don't really need to see this one, but if the recipient falls under, maybe this person, in the event hint, can we populate that or just tell the customer, or tell us, the analyst, maybe like a faster, quick track around figuring out what they need to do in this instance?
Yes, so filters and playbooks can be built on the same value, the same Boolean logic that I was speaking about earlier,
Mhm.
right? So we could say if the user matches or contains or is in this group or is titled this name, right?
Mhm.
Don't take action on their account, or this is
Mhm.
automatically a high priority, or look here, do you see this in the subject line? If so,
Mhm.
this is an expected email and it might flag for phishing or spam or something, right?
Yeah.
All of that is additional guidance that once the client provides it to us, all we have to do is, as I was saying earlier, is go in, modify that playbook, hit save,
Mhm.
have that
Mhm.
two-person integrity, have someone else come in and review, make sure we did it correctly, and then hit the apply button. And as soon as we do that, every alert that comes in after that fact, every event that comes in after that fact, is going to have that updated ROE in it, and those can be org specific. So, for instance, if this is a
Bam.
global event hint that's meant for all of our clients to see, or
Mhm.
all of our clients' environments to help our analysts guide them down how to solve that. We can make one client specific that says, hey, this is a critical asset. Don't take that action
Right.
on this specific one.
Right. So aligning to what they're identifying and what their needs are, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, so that's super important. It goes back to making sure that, as a provider, we have to shift with your needs and align with what they're needing from the actionable as faster than what we can send as an escalation, right? So if they tell us this is what we want based on this action before you escalate to us, that is getting back to the MDR and getting them to align with what the requirements are before it gets over. Two more things I want to go over before we switch off here, which is the playbook and filter. So again, on the playbook side, as I click this, we're opening up the playbooks here. So can you go over that really quick with me?
Yeah, of course. The top half there is pretty self-explanatory, right? We have a title, a description
Yep.
box to describe what the information is. But right underneath that, you see a couple of different fields, right? You see the active during. That's important
Yep.
because it allows us to essentially scope this specific to the business hours or time that you want, right? Most people will
Yep.
say, 24/7, don't all time. We want this to be active. But some people might say, hey, this individual is traveling to a different country next week. We don't want impossible travel or atypical travel type alerting on that user because it's expected and authorized, right? So we can
Mhm.
set that time period specific. If you're saying we only want this alert to be sent to us after business hours, right? We can set it to that very easily. After
Mhm.
that, we have the mandatory and optional fields. Again, you
Mhm.
heard me mention Boolean a couple times, right? Things like or, if type statements to put it simple. We can build that out right there. So you'll see, for instance, if you said anytime a malicious URL click detection for this user comes in attached to this IP, we don't need to see that. Filter that out for us,
Mm.
right? In the mandatories,
Yep.
I could add that analytic name, rule
Mhm.
name, right? I could add that
Yep.
username, IP, right? And that
Yep.
URL. And
Got it.
anytime we see those coming in now, they'll be matched by that TBR. Very nice.
Mhm. So that's how obviously we're making sure we bring awareness to specific things, but also reducing false positives at the same time.
Correct.
Yeah, it's kind of the same thing, right? Filter playbook there. Playbook is obviously making sure it falls into the right bucket, but filtering, making sure it falls into the right bucket, but securely, and removing
Correct.
it unless it goes through a threshold that doesn't match the criteria in that filter.
Exactly. Yeah. Filtering,
Yep.
think about it more as resolution. Playbook, think about
Mhm.
it more as assistant and guidance.
Yeah. Right, right, right. Okay. Awesome. Well, I think that's all I had, Terrence. I mean, this is a great overview. Really like going over this really quick and seeing some key values there, especially as we talked about it before. Anything else that you had before we drop off?
No, it's just a real honor to be here. Thank you guys for having me and sitting through my
Yeah.
spiel. I know I get way too excited. I love my SOC team, so I love getting to represent them.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Terrence, for your time. I appreciate it. Okay, everyone, we're going to switch over and I'm going to talk more about the proactive measurements. But really quick, I just want to wrap up the key takeaways there that we talked about with Terrence. So Number one thing is around that TBR. When we build out those filters, you need to have some type of backend that really brings all that. So the playbooks, the filters, that's where you're going to reduce a lot of those false positives. You're going to bring more faster time to value so that you can understand exactly what needs to happen from the business needs, the alignment needs, the MDR needs to stay aligned with you. So by doing so, you can do that, with our core platform, right? Because we have all of those enabled widgets for you to be able to correspond with back to our MDR. Now, obviously, the most important thing here, and we didn't cover this with Terrence, but this is kind of like the known thing, is you need to have the MDR that's, of course, working 24/7, 365. At place of critical start, we have two SOCs. One, obviously, both are located in the U.S., but you need to make sure you have those staggered shifts so you don't have any reduction in dwell time there, especially as the shifts switch over. So again, you have to have that coverage 24/7 all year round, as well as the two-person verification and integrity checks. The contractual SLAs, making sure that you have, again, 10 minutes on those criticals, and as well as a 60-minute minimum, 60-minute time to detect and 60-minute time to respond, right? Super important that you make sure you have that. That way, all alerts get checked, none get unchecked, and there's a time frame that goes around them, so you are aware that every single one will get looked at. Tailored response actions. Terrence just talked about that, but essentially looking at making sure we have those event hints built out as you need them, customizable to your needs. And lastly, and we didn't really talk about this much because this kind of goes into that slow to response time, after hours time. You need to have some type of actionary platform that can basically be on your phone. So I want to just throw in there that the mobile SOC platform that comes with Core, that comes with Critical Start, super important to have, super functional. Or the functionality behind it is super important because it's one-to-one to basically what you just saw on the screen prior to this. You're able to just log in within biometrics, see the alert that came through within one click, and be able to do a response within another click, basically, to be able to tell the SOC exactly what you need to do when you're not around your either workspace or work laptop, that you can provide that response to us. So in order to bring an actual solidified synchronization between a customer and an MDR solution, basically it's asking the question, are you future ready for what's to come in cybersecurity? There's a lot of unknowns out there that occur next year. What's going to happen in 2025, 2026? Everyone's talking about AI. What is that going to change in terms of the format and how fast things get prioritized, responded to, and actioned? Are you syncing what your organization has to come with in terms of automation and AI and bringing that to our platform to make sure we are aware of those things? Is their performance bringing the value to the ROI? So is your team escalating back to us? Are we checking those boxes to make sure that team is getting back to us in a sufficient time so there's no dwell time, right? Now, in terms of the core platform, if I can just pivot for just a second, on our back end, we make sure we look at those numbers as well. So we can simply identify, is the performance between our SOC and your team glued together? Are we looking at both of those values? The answer is yes. And you need to look at those values because as we escalate over, it needs to come back in a good amount of time. Again, that kind of ties into the justified value, making sure that when you do have that monthly discussion and you're looking at the reports, you're looking at all the true positives that are coming in versus carving out the time it takes to remove the false positives. That's where the true value comes in. You don't just hire an MDR to come in and just do false positives all day. We need to make sure we always have that heightened awareness and understanding where those true positives are getting removed out of your environment. And we talked about that, of course, with Terrence. But the next question I have for everyone is, how are you doing that, right? So making sure you're going towards the proactive measurement, right? So talking about identifying all of those instances of vulnerabilities and asset gaps, right? So building a strategy around it. So you're going to see a repeat of a slide here because it's foundational that you build it on top of the MDR solution, right? You have to shift from being reactive to proactive to see the value in that. Okay. So again, really tying it all together of aligning yourself with, something like the cybersecurity format of, the NIST CSF, right? So when we look at, moving forward, being proactive in this space, what are you aligning yourself to? What is the benchmark that you need to shift towards, right? And I know that was a sudden shift, but that's essentially what I'm trying to get at without really just kind of bleeding into it. It's aligning to yourself to the 2.0 standard. And as we go towards that, I do have another poll question for everybody in here. Are you aligning your business to the cybersecurity 2.0 NIST format? I know Victoria is going to throw that poll out for everybody. If you can, let us know. Are you, yes, working on it, or just straight out, no, not right now? It's on the agenda probably, but it's just not. I know it just came out too. Probably, what was it, a month ago? So it is very new, but it's very important because from an MDR perspective, it's bringing in a lot of information that everybody needs to be aware of. What is that information? Well, really, it's important because it's not just detect and respond anymore. Now we're looking at that recovery piece, right? That identification for critical assets, total assets, 100% coverage, protection from, again, the security controls. And one of the new aspects that's coming into this is supply chain security. That's been a pretty hot topic that's probably been in the talk now for about a year or so, but really coming into the fold of the governance around the CSF 2.0. So IT OT, right? So when we talk about all of the things all put together in what we call MCRR, Managed Cyber Risk Reduction, we have our identification, which has all your asset visibility, your asset management, and your augmentation, right? Your protection, minor attack, making sure you map to that. Detection, all your SIM, your MDR, your endpoint protection solution, your OT, your SIMs, and your hybrid, your XDRs, right? Response actions, incident response, risk security, operate your RSOC, making sure all of that is aligned. But the last piece that I just didn't talk about, and I just want to make sure we cover, is making sure you have those recovery positions in place. Making sure you have a forensics plan in place. Post-incident monitoring when something does occur. And then lastly, making sure you have a dashboard that correlates all that information together. So you have one pane of glass to see all of this when you do those risk assessments. So when you are completing them, making sure you have an identification of where you're at, getting there, right? You're not off the runway yet, but you're working towards aligning towards that. This is where, you need to make sure you have that foundation built, and you need to have a platform that ingests that, right? Not just on your desktop, not just in a folder somewhere. You need to bring that somewhere so all eyes can be on that in your foundation. So, last question I have, would you like to hear more about Critical Start? If yes, please let us know. If no, don't worry. And hey, maybe we're already talking about it. So, wrap it up there. I have basically 5 minutes here, but we could go over the time slot here. Are there any questions from anybody in the chat room? Please put them in here. I have the Q&A open. Let me know. If not, I completely understand. I'm standby. I hope you guys enjoyed the webinar. I know I had a good time. It was fun, exciting.
It looks like we have one question.
Okay, throw it in.
How do you ensure success at scale?
Oh, ensure success at scale. Okay, so we really need to cut that out into two factors, right? You have large entities and small entities. And what do I mean by entities is large businesses, small businesses. Large businesses have a lot of budget in order to fulfill the seats that are required to do vulnerabilities, to do, asset control monitoring, to make sure that they have maybe their own security engineering team to look at all of those detections that are firing, right? Smaller entities don't necessarily have all the budgetary requirements and are really heavily relying on the MDR to provide all of that, right? So with that being said, this comes into where the alignment factor needs to happen, right? So it doesn't matter if you're large, small, medium, doesn't matter. You need to ask the question, do you have what's in place to make sure that you can identify the vulnerabilities in your environment? If no, then we can help you with that. But again, keyword prioritization on that, making sure you know what exactly is weaponized against your vertical. If you're a banking, if you're oil and gas, what types of vulnerabilities are you susceptible to right now, right? That is where some key values are. If you are a small entity and you don't even have, a seat to fulfill for those vulnerabilities, making sure you're aligned with an MDR that has that capability, right? That's where an MDR needs to make sure that we come over the top to say, well, we have a service for you that can provide that if you do not. Any other questions, Victoria?
Yes, we have another one. Does Critical Start need to install sensors, or is it directly integrated?
That's a great question. So Critical Start's completely agentless. We directly integrate with the API for all of our products. Great question.
Awesome. And then the last one, can you tell me more about your mobile SOC?
Yeah. So mobile SOC is honestly, it's one of the best things we've gotten feedback from, because we've really built it out to just be one-to-one with what you see in the dashboard. So the ROI, all of the widgets and all of the information, right? So as soon as you log into mobile SOC, you immediately see the alerts that you need to work on. That's the first and foremost. The secondary is being able to action on those alerts without having to use both your thumbs and write a paragraph on something. What we built out in mobile SOC is for you to be able to have predetermined response actions that you can basically click with if you're just using one hand, you can simply respond back and simply say, I want to isolate this device. Well, you can do that literally within 2 thumb clicks on the alert itself, and it will send that feedback directly back to the SOC, and then action will then occur. Now, let's say you want to remove that isolation. Well, you can do that as well. You can simply hit remove isolation. I got the feedback from this person. It's 2:00 in the morning, and I don't have the time to go over to my workspace and remove this. So you can simply hit reverse that action, and that will be sent over and basically removed from the isolation then. So very, very, very important to have something to have a fast response on, in case you have someone who is of very high importance that needs to be remediated or sensitive in the environment, to make sure that you remove them so that they can get back to their work if they're working those after hours.
Awesome.
Any other questions?
No, that is all.
Awesome.
Thank you
Great.
all so much for joining us. And thank you, Terrence and Carl, for your time today. As a reminder, you will receive the recording within 24 hours of this presentation, and we look forward to connecting with you all soon. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, everyone. Have a great day, and I'll see you on the next one.